Today is April 4, 2025. We are in the Civic Center, and it's 3:59, and we're with Marie Melovidov and Marie Perez Melovidov.
Perez Melovidov.
Perez Melovidov. And I'm here, Aquilina Lesnikov. George Putnikov Jr. is here. Marie, may we record you?
Yes.
Okay. So, I'm looking forward to hearing you speak about this. Just for now, just to give us, if you can share your name, your full name, if anything about where you were born, brothers, sisters, parents, maybe how you got your name, anything like that that you want to share.
My name is Maria Perez Melovidov. I'm married to Myron Alex Melovidov, and he is born and raised here in St. Paul Island. I was born and raised in Guam, the Mariana Islands, and my parents are Florencia and Juan Perez. My mother's maiden name is Florencia Kenga, and my father's name is Juan Castro Perez. I have 9 siblings altogether, and there's 8 of us that are here. I'm the eldest of the siblings, and they know me. My nickname that my grandmother gave me is Mary Jane, and so everybody calls me that, Mary Jane. But as I got older, everybody would just say, Sister Mary. Hey, Mary, what are you doing? And so my siblings are John Anthony, Florence, Julia, Ramona. We lost a baby sister. Her name was Ramona. And then Therese, Jesse Jr., and Janice. I live here in St. Paul Island in Alaska. And my one sister lives in Denver. My other sister lives in California. And everybody else is at home. Well, my other brother is in California also. So the rest of the siblings are there. I grew up with my grandmother. She's a very sweet lady. And with my siblings and my parents, being the eldest, they always would tease me and say, you're spoiled, Grandma spoiled you. But actually, she showed me a lot of love. She's a church-going person, and I learned a lot. I miss her. Grandma, the biggest thing Grandma taught me was, wherever you go, always respect people. You just don't get respect by showing respect, but you earn it also. You show people respect, and when you show that respect, it's the attention is there. They share what they believe with the definition of respecting, and not just your elders, especially your elders, but anyone that you meet, family, friends. Family values is very, very strong when I was growing up. And so moving forward, coming to St. Paul Island is my journey. I believe that my first visit here was not just to come and visit, but leaving St. Paul Island for 9 months. I knew in between that somewhere along the line, it's like someone said, you are going to return back to that island. And so...
How did you come here?
Everybody asks me that. So, first of all, there are those that know that I'm not from here. There are those that didn't know. And so I worked at home with one of the young ladies that is from here, St. Paul Island. Her name is Pachi Melovidov. Her name is Platnita. We called her Pachi. And we worked together.
In Guam?
Yes, at my hometown. And she started to tell me about where she's from. I like to meet people, socialize with them. I'm very shy, but when I get to meet people, I'm able to open up. And that's how I get to meet my friends. And so she was one of my friends, and we spoke about her hometown. But I never thought it was in Alaska. I thought it was in the lower 48s. But she just, shared with me. She says, I'll bring one of my photo albums and I'll show you where my hometown is and what we do there, what's there. I said, oh, that would be great. So every summer I pretty much go to California with my grandmother to visit my Uncle Steve. That's where he lives. And so the one summer, Pachi had told me that she would be leaving soon after graduating, and she would be coming home to attend her sister's wedding. Her sister, Becky, was getting married. This was in 1978. And so I was excited. I told her, I said, well, let me talk to my grandmother and see if it's okay with her.
By this time, you were good friends.
And so we're good friends, and she started telling me about her hometown. Just like I said, not thinking that it's in Alaska. It's like, oh, I can't wait to go see your hometown, She kept saying St. Paul. She never said St. Paul Island. She just kept saying St. Paul. It's like, oh my gosh, I wonder how it is at your hometown. It should be exciting, And she says, oh, yeah. So when she brought the album down, and I said, there's a lot of snow. And then she said, yeah, she introduced her family through photos. The island, what was here on the island back then and then present. And I told her, I said, so where in St. Paul do you live? Not in the United States? So we both looked at each other, and she says, no, I live in St. Paul Island, Alaska. And I said, oh my gosh, Alaska. I've never been to Alaska. You know what? I'm going to tell my grandmother I'm not going to go to California. I will come with you to your sister's wedding. And oh my gosh, Alaska, oh, I can't wait. So I was overwhelmed, excited. I told my grandmother, I said, oh, Grandma, I really want to go. I don't know, this might be the only chance I'll have to go to Alaska. And she says, Pachi's from Alaska? And so, to my family, it's like we just spoke about St. Paul.
And they knew her, your family knew her?
Yes, my family knew her. They met her. And I told her, I said, oh my gosh, I'm excited. Okay, I'll make sure that we make the arrangements and we'll head to Alaska. And so that's how I came to St. Paul Island. Pachi invited me to her sister's wedding. And that's...
Did you travel with her?
Yes, I did.
At the same time?
We traveled together. And Pachi was great. She stayed on top of it. She told me where we were going, what type of airplane I was going to fly on, where we were going to live in Anchorage, and when we got into St. Paul. So just bits and pieces as we traveled together. And I did ask her, I said, how did you come to my hometown? And she told me that her mom had married someone from my hometown, and that's how her and her siblings and her mom had traveled to Guam. And she decided to stay and continue school at my hometown, and she attended John F. Kennedy High School. And so her goal was to graduate from high school, return to home, Alaska, and pursue her degree to become a teacher. And I'm really proud of her because she completed that not just as a teacher. I believe she also got her bachelor's, her master's, and then, if I'm correct, I believe she also pursued principal status. I could be wrong. Getting ready for our travels, I had told my family, I said, okay, I'm ready to go to Alaska. She
Did
helped
you
me.
have the right clothes?
Well, I was just going to get into that. She says, well, I told her, I said, I know it's cold in Alaska, but it's summertime, right? So for me, growing up in a tropical island, it's always sun shining or it's raining, right? And so she says, we'll go shopping and I'll help you. So I went shopping and she helped me get a jacket that would be fit for me to bring with me to wear because I'm coming to the Pribilof Islands. And so I told her, I said, gosh, this is really heavy. And so she says, you're going to need it. And so
Was
I was
this
like,
like
okay.
spring, or what time of year was this? May or?
It was in May.
Okay.
Right, May of 78. And we were talking about it. And Becky and Anthony were getting married in July. So I believe we started, like I said, making arrangements. And then she said, okay, and I just couldn't get it out of my head. And it's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go to Alaska, you guys, And my sisters were like, you sure you want to go? You might get stuck there. And I said, no, I'm not. I'll be returning. I'll come home. And I knew that Pachi wasn't going to return back with me. And so we went shopping. We got the things I wanted to bring with me. And she says, well, you know what? She started to fancy me, tease me and say, well, you're not going to wear a dress, right? And I said, well, why not? I wear a dress, skirts, jeans. What do you want me to wear, shorts? So I kind of teased about it. She says, no, you could wear pants. So I said, okay, I'll try to wear something that would make me comfortable. So we did that, curled my hair, I was like, okay, these are the things I'm going to do. And I know she left some surprises for me because she definitely did. So the day came when we were going to travel, and I told my grandmother, I said, Grandma, thank you, and I'll see you when I get back. And Pachi had already told me, my family, that she wasn't going to be returning with me. And she wanted to make sure that I'll be fine flying all the way back home without her. And I said, oh, I'll be fine. Don't worry. Let's go. We got to go. We're excited. And she says, okay, we're going to fly to Anchorage. And when we get to Anchorage, we will be staying with an elder couple. And I said, okay. And she said their names was George and Mary Berdikovsky. So I said, okay. Did you let them know I'm coming with you? With respect, I wanted to make sure that they knew. And so she said, yeah. She said, yes. I told them that I was bringing a friend from Guam. So I said, okay. So we left home, we flew from my hometown to Honolulu, from Honolulu to Anchorage. So got into Anchorage, and at the airport, she introduced George and Mary to me. But everyone has addressed George and Mary as Uncle George and Auntie Mary. So that's how it all started, where I immediately, nice to meet you, Uncle George, and nice to meet you, Auntie Mary. And so we lived with them, and it was funny because we were scheduled, I believe, to leave Anchorage, I believe a couple of days later. There's a plane flight, right, schedule. And so I was trying to get ready for bed. We're laying down, and it's like, Pachi, I can't sleep. She says, what's the matter? And I said, why is it not dark outside? Why is it not dark outside? It's like 11:30 at night, and it's not dark. And she started laughing, and she said, what's Alaska known for, right? Land of the midnight sun. And so we both bursted out laughing, and I said, honest, I can't sleep. Maybe I'm too excited, just looking forward to really coming to her hometown. And she said, oh, you'll be fine, you'll be fine. So eventually I did fall asleep. Yep. Took the blankets, pillow, whatever, and just tried to tell myself, go to sleep, get some rest. And so that's how I came to meet Auntie Mary and Uncle George. Auntie Mary, she's a sweet lady. I never met her, but her and Uncle George welcomed me into their home. She had prepared halibut fish pie, and I believe it was potato salad, and she made mossberry pie with St. Paul berries. And so that's what we had. So, getting ready to leave Anchorage to come to St. Paul Island. Pachi didn't tell me this. She tells me later, like, okay, well, are you ready? And it's like, yeah. And she's, yes. And she says, we're going to fly on this plane, but it's not a jumbo plane. I said, well, what type of plane are we flying on? And she says, it's Revolution Airways. And I said, okay. And she said, but you'll be fine. She's telling me I'll be fine. And I said, well, is it a small plane? And she says, yeah, it's smaller than the jumbo plane, the jet plane that we flew in. And then I said, okay, you're with me, so I'm sure I'll be fine. So she says, okay. So the day we were leaving to come to St. Paul, we're all dressed up, ready to head to the airport, check in, give Auntie Mary and Uncle George a big hug, saying thank you. And I told them, I said, I'll see you on my way back from St. Paul Island. And they said, okay, I'm welcome to live with them, stay with them. So we're at the airport, and Pachi says, there's the plane. And it's like, oh, okay. I said, looks good. I think I'll be fine. It doesn't look that small.
Props.
Yeah. And so we got on the plane. And then when we got on the Revolution Airways, she says, just so you know, we can't watch movies. It's not like the jumbo jet. It's not like the 747, right? And it's like, oh, okay. It's fine. She says, are you comfortable? And I said, yes. I said, people are smoking on the plane. And she said, yeah, you could smoke. It's like, oh, okay. So anyway, so we're getting ready to leave Anchorage, and she said we had to make a stop in Cold Bay. And so I said, oh, okay, so it's not a straight flight. She says, no, we'll stop in Cold Bay, and then we'll fly to St. Paul from there. So, okay, so we're good, leave Anchorage, get into Cold Bay. So now the final leg of our trip is to St. Paul Island. And I told her, I said, okay. And so I'm thinking in my mind, like, what do I say? How do I greet her family? So I'm getting nervous, I was like, how do I meet her family? What do I say?
Was her mom back here by then?
No, her mom wasn't here.
Okay.
It was just,
Becky?
there was Pachi and myself, Becky, Julie, Rena, Sammy, and I believe Nikolai was here also.
Okay.
And so, also Pachi had told me we would be living with her grandparents. And that's Sergei and Nadesta Shaisnikov. So I said, okay. And then we were coming into St. Paul. And she told me, she says, when we're going to land on my hometown, it's not like the airport at your hometown. So I said, okay. And she says, we're going to land on this runway, and it's scoria. And I said, okay, so do I need to be worried? And she says, no, yeah. So, okay, so we're coming in, approaching to land. You see all this red colored dust, flying all over the place. It was a beautiful day, but it was windy that day, I remember. So the plane landed, and as the plane is turning so that they can park, they're turning, and I said to Pachi, why are all those people standing by that fence there? And she said, they're going to greet us. And I said, oh my gosh, I'm really nervous. I'll be right behind you. Don't walk away from me, okay? Because remember, I don't know anybody. She says, yeah, you do. You met my siblings through photos. I said, well, I know, but you know what I mean, right? And at that point, I got really nervous, like, oh my gosh. As you know, it's her first time home. And so when you come home for the first time, family's happy to see you. So everybody kind of pulls you, hugs you. I was like, oh man, I'm just going to stand right behind her to myself, like I'm just going to follow her. Wherever she goes, I'm just going to follow her. And I'm probably going to get hugged and smothered by everyone. And so we landed. The doors open. And the first thing I felt was the Pribilov wind. It was summertime, beginning of summer, but it was cold, and my teeth were chattering. I was like trembling, and I was like, I'm freezing. It's cold here. You told me it was going to be sun shining and it's going to be nice. This is beautiful weather for us. And so I survived it. I mean, there was nothing I could do. I was in St. Paul Island, out in the Bering Sea, and I was freezing. I was cold. So we got off. So it's so different because the airport here is not like the airport out in Anchorage or at my hometown. Mm-hmm. And so you know how you expect to go, and when you get off the plane, you go to pick up your suitcase. So I said to Pachi,
because you went on the other side. This is before POS camp.
Right.
Yeah. So
this is at the old airport.
Yeah.
Right. And so I said, okay, I see your families. We're looking out the window, and it's like, okay, I'm right behind you. I promise I'll be right behind you. She says, okay. Pachi's already all excited. She's in tears. She's happy. And I remember the photos of her siblings, and I can recognize them already before I even walked over to meet them. And then I told her, I said, I see your sisters. I think that's Julie and Rena. And I can hear them, yelling for Pachi, Pachi, you're home. And we got off the plane. I followed her. We walked over, and everybody immediately, everyone started greeting the both of us. Welcome to St. Paul, Marie. And everybody knew my name. That was the other thing. I didn't know 3/4 of the people that were out of the airport, but everybody knew who I was already before I got off the plane. I figured Pachi told the family, so everybody's going to know who I am, right? And so Becky and Anthony drove us back. And before we left the airport, I said, where do we go to get our suitcase? And I said, do we need to go over to that building? There was a green building out there. And back then they had the flatbeds. Mm-hmm. And so she says, oh, there goes our suitcases. And I said, where are they taking them? So I got worried that I would lose my suitcase. Mm-hmm. And so she started laughing, and she says, oh, no, it'll be in town. Well, Becky and Anthony will drive us there. So it's like, okay. So I said, all right. So I met Anthony and Becky, gave them a hug, told them I was happy to meet them. And we rode back to where we were to pick up our suitcases. So where this was at is where the Alu Community Store is. And it was downstairs. And this was the funny part. So I went to pick up our suitcase, and we pull in. And I follow Pachi. I said, oh, wait, I need to get my baggage tag out, right? She says, no, you don't need it. There's only so many of us. So I said, are you sure? I don't need to show my ID or anything? And so this is new to me. And so I followed her. We walked in, and our suitcases were right there. But when we were picking up our suitcase, there were people selling beer. And it's like, oh, okay. She said, the store's upstairs, and over here is where they sell beer. I said, oh, okay. Pick up our suitcase and we leave. And so to myself, it's like, okay. This is totally different from home. Totally different, right? And I'm not judging anybody or anything, but to me it was like,
beer suitcases.
yeah. So, yeah. And so we picked up our suitcase, and then everywhere that on the way home, she was telling me, so this is how we get to my grandmother and grandfather's house. So I watched and I said, oh, to myself, it's like, I'll be fine. I don't think I'll get lost, you know? So I watched, saw the church. Church was beautiful. I said, that'll be my landmark, the church. Mm-hmm. So I knew where the store was. I knew where the church was. And on the way over to her grandmother's, I saw these cats outside. So, you know, like I said, I'm not judging anybody, but, or, you know, anywhere, but, or anything. But I saw these cats, and they were huge. And I said, Pachi, I've never seen cats that are huge. They remind me of Garfield. Or, you know, just in the cartoon, you know, a huge cat. And I said, oh my gosh, they're everywhere. And I said, I don't know if I will feel okay walking by myself. She said, well, you won't walk by yourself. We'll be with you. Because I feel like one of those cats is going to jump at me. Because they were big. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we got to her grandma and grandpa's place, and I got to meet her grandparents. Very nice elder. They welcomed me. Hospitality was great. Beautiful home. And it was the first 2-story home that I had walked into in St. Paul. And it was so pretty. I admired her. I called it her little greenhouse where her plants were. And you could just see the ocean. I call it the ocean. Because to me, I said, well, I could see the beach. And Pachi says, well, you know, that connects to the ocean. I said, yeah, I see that. And I told her, I said, oh my gosh, it's so pretty. And then later on, Pachi says, okay, we're going to meet up. Julie and Rena will be heading there, and they're all going to get together, talk about stuff for the wedding. And I said, okay, so wherever you go, I'm going to go with you.
Then? Like Julie and Rena, that I wasn't here yet in that time frame, but where were they living? Because Mom was not here yet.
Julie and Rena stayed with
Kalachi and
Clara and Kalachi,
okay.
And then Pachi and I lived with her grandparents, Sergei and Nadezhda, and Sammy lived with them also.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to, you know, I don't remember. I don't think Nikolai was there. Yeah. Maybe he was, but he did not live with the grandparents. Right. Okay. So he may have lived with Clara and Kalachi also. Don't quote me on that one. Might have to edit that one.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I got to meet her grandparents, met Becky and Anthony. We went for a walk after dinner, and she started to tell me where the wedding's going to be at, which is the rec hall, where the church is, the post office, the gas station, who lived in what house, where there used to be cafes, who had owned them, and they weren't there. They were no longer here or up and running when I came to St. Paul. The hotel, the bar, which is the tavern, the school, I called it the government buildings because that's where they did the processing of the seals, right? So I identified as the government buildings. She pointed all that out to me. And it was really, I started to have more interest in what St. Paul had. And I told Pachi, I said, oh my gosh, everything is right here, you know, right in the center of town. And so for me, it's the adventure of, wow, I'm going to leave St. Paul Island and I get to go home and tell my family about Pachi's hometown, people I've met, and what I learned, their culture, what they did during the summer,
Did you stay
what
the whole
type of
summer?
food. Yes, I did.
did,
Yeah,
huh?
what how they did things, how they made decisions, and it was it it was for me. I came to an island that was peaceful, but yet it's not like the city, where it's loud, it's real busy all the time. And for me, coming to St. Paul Island for the first time, it made me think about my hometown. Like, how was it? How many years ago was my home something like St. Paul?
Because by
Before.
then you came from what was the size of the town that you came from? Like thousands of people, or?
So my hometown, right now I know the population it's overpopulated. I believe it could be 160,000 people now. But yes,
Okay.
it's
It was
my
pretty
home.
big size when you were there too.
Yes.
Yeah.
So at my hometown and with St. Paul, it's so different because St. Paul Island for me is very unique. There was one store, one school, one tavern, one hotel, one gas station, one post office. There was no shopping centers, no malls. It made me think a lot about how it was maybe way back then, years ago, at my hometown, how they came about to develop, and what I had at that moment, to where St. Paul is just coming up and building and having what they would like to see in their hometown. And it made me feel that the Aleuts, the Unangans, that's what Pachi said, we're the Unangans. We need to back up somewhere. I wanted to share something. But anyway, I told Pachi, I was like, my gosh, your hometown, it's so interesting. It can make anyone feel like, you don't want to leave, you want to stay and learn more about it. And when you leave, you want to share that. And so for me, even just seeing the seals, I've never seen a seal before, a live seal, in books maybe. And I forgot to mention, when I did meet Pachi, I did call her. I said, oh, so you're from Alaska, you're an Eskimo. And at that moment, she felt offended. She said, I'm not an Eskimo. I am Aleut. And I said, I'm sorry, what is Aleut? So in our history books, we only know and read of Eskimos. Even the word Eskimo itself, it's like, I did not know, I was not aware that there's Inupiat, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, Inupiat, Yupik, and then there's also Indian natives, indigenous people, there's Tlingit, Haida. So all this started to come together. But anyway,
And then there's the Aleut.
I did call Pachi Eskimo, and she said, I'm not Eskimo, I'm Aleut. I told her, I said, I'm very sorry. I said, I'm a Chamorro, I'm a Gomanian. I said, I'm sorry, I don't know of Aleuts, but hey, I have an Aleut friend. And so that's how I found out about Aleuts, by meeting Pachi, her becoming a friend of mine, and her bringing me to her hometown. And that was the excitement that I found for myself, to not just come to St. Paul Island for a wedding. The interest it gave to me was to learn, know, understand who the Aleut people are in St. Paul Island, in the Bering Sea.
You mentioned, you said you were away for 9 months. So when you were here...
So I came to St. Paul Island for the summer, and then I left for 9 months.
Like during
and then
the fall, winter.
And then I returned.
You wanted to come back.
I returned. I was invited. So we'll back up a little bit. So while I was here in St. Paul, I got to see the process of the seal harvest. You know, the excitement of, wow, I can take pictures. Someone came up to me and said, you need to put your camera away. You're not allowed, you're not permitted to take pictures. And it's like, so I got a little scared. And it's like, you know, I told Pachi, I said, am I going to get in trouble because I was taking pictures? She said, no, but it's run by the government, and so don't put that in there. But anyway, they just told me not to take pictures. So whatever photos I had in my camera, I took it all the way home, and that's where I had it developed because I wanted to take something home and share with my family what was in St. Paul, what's here in St. Paul. And so I got to go to the seal harvest. I watched how they did their harvest, and then I came into town and I watched how they went from the fields to the plants, to the buildings where they had taken the seal. And I know byproducts they would take. With byproducts, that's where Pachi worked. She was hired to work there. And I watched them bring the seals in, and they would go through this what do you call that? Gosh, I'm so nervous.
Was that like the conveyor with
Yes,
the hooks?
yes, thank you. Went through a conveyor, the seals were hung, and then it would cut the heads and they would drop into this machine, and then they would take the seals, whatever, and then the ladies would bag it. But that was the only part that I saw. Later on, when I had gone back to see Pachi at the byproducts plant, she had showed me what they did, what she did. And they would put plastic bags around the carcasses, right? There's no skins on them because the skins are removed at the field, but that's what they did. And so I had gone down to the blubbering shed, and I got to watch and see what they did with the skin. So they would take the skins and put them over this, like, to me it was like a concrete, to me it was like a concrete slab or something, to where they laid the skins on, and then they had these long, I guess they call it the blubbering tool, and they put it against the skin, the inner part of the skin, not the outer part, and it would be just men in there, and they would start from the top and they would push down, and that's how they removed the blubber. Am I correct? I believe that's what it was. And so I'm a question box. And Pachi says, quit asking questions. I said, Mom, you got to tell me what they're doing. Why are they doing it that way? And then you see women on the other building where I believe they took the skins after they were put into this, like a brine or something. And you see the ladies wearing aprons. They were covered in this white powder. And so I believe they rolled up the seal skins, and then they would put them in big boxes. And then when that was done, they were covered. I believe someone was counting. I'm not sure, but I didn't stay very long to watch exactly what they did. It was just a little bit of everything. Yeah, and they would all be speaking in either the Unangan language. The ladies would be laughing. So I have no idea what they're talking about. But they were having a great time. The men in the blubbering shed, that's hard work. For me, that was like, oh my gosh, that's hard work. You know, you think their back and their arms. I was like, man, I don't know if I could do something like that. Because I didn't see no women doing it, just men. And then what I love about the seal harvest was how they would get together in the morning. And I'm ahead of myself, Debbie. So I stayed for the summer. Vicky and Anthony's wedding it was great. never seen an Orthodox wedding before. I went to the wedding, but before the wedding there were church services, and the priest was Father Michael Lesninkov. And so growing up, wore chapel caps. And Pachi says, you don't need to wear your chapel cap to go into our church. And I said, why not? And so she says, oh, because if you wear a chapel cap, there's two things. It's either you're married or you have a child. And I said, well, neither of that. I'm not married, I don't have children. But I will not walk into your church without my head covered. And so I told her, I said, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to go against your belief or what it is that you were brought up about the church, but I am going to walk into the church. I'm going to attend your church service, and I will cover my head. So I put my chapel cap and I walked in, and she said, everybody's going to stare at you. And I told her, I said, it's okay. They can stare at me. If they want to ask me anything, I'll tell them. Yeah, so I walked into church. When I walked into church, see the men on one side, the women. She did tell me. She said, when you come in, the men and the women don't stand together. And I said, how come? And she says, it's always been that way. The men are always on the left, right side, and the women on the left. And then she said, well, okay, just tell me where to go. She did not tell me that we had to stand up throughout the whole service. And so went to church. It was real nice. Another thing was making my sign of the cross. I didn't feel embarrassed to make my sign of the cross, but I knew that everybody did it the opposite way. And so I told Pachi, I said, I hope I'm not making anybody feel uncomfortable because I'm not Russian Orthodox. She said, oh no, you'll be fine. Yeah. So I went to church and I listened. Service was nice, beautiful. The church was beautiful. And that's the first Orthodox church I've ever been to. Meeting Father Michael, very nice. He likes to joke around, you know. He even asked me if I knew how to say bread in Aleut. This is like later on. Yeah. So I went to the church, the wedding, the dance. So the rec hall, they had dances on Friday nights or whenever there's an event like the wedding. And so we went to my first dance. And I told Pachi,
You were here for the 4th of July then?
Yes.
Before the wedding? Yeah, okay.
So I went to the dance, and Pachi says, oh, okay, you didn't bring a long dress. Well, you told me not. You told me only to pack what I needed to bring. So she said, maybe Becky will have a dress for you. So I said, okay. I said, I don't know. I was really slim. So I said, oh, okay. Well, Pachi came home, and she had a dress for me. I said, okay. How are we getting up to the dance? She said, we're going to walk. I said, you expect me to walk with sandals, heels, curled hair, and it's windy outside? She says, we'll be fine. We'll have fun. I said, okay, we'll have fun. Yeah, so here's Pachi and I, we curl our hair, and we're ready to go to the dance. We're both walking up to the dance, and we finally get to the rec hall. So we got to the rec hall, walk in, and I said, wow, this is nice. And the band was the Roseanne, Max, I believe Agathon, Pat, Neon, or maybe it might have been Philip, the drummer. And Victor. Lakia? Yeah. So, and the band was the Bombay Lady and the Boogie Band. And I was telling Myron, it's like, it's Bombay Lady and the Boogeyman. I said, and he said, no, it's the Boogie
Oh,
Band.
that's a good name. Though.
So no, so when he told me, the name of the band, I said, wow, that's interesting. Bombay Lady and the Boogie Band. You know what? My hometown, we have this thing we call the Boogeyman. Yeah. And so I told Myron, I shared that story with him. But we also have the Bombay Lady. Yeah, and I said, it's interesting. The connection, like for me to hear something like that. It's like, wow, the name of the band is the Bombay Lady and the Boogie Band. And I said, wow, that's interesting. To myself, that's interesting. And Roseanne was the singer. And so I was excited. It's the first dance. So we went and sat there and waited. And then there's this one guy that walked up to me. I don't know who he is, but he introduced himself. He said, would you like to dance? And it's like, no, it's okay. And I love to dance, but I'm bashful. I'm shy. And so it's like, no, it's okay. I didn't want to make trouble. I didn't know if maybe he had a partner or, just something like that. I'm new to the island, and I wasn't here to make any trouble. I didn't know. It's like, no, it's okay. And so he says, man, I can sing for you. And I said, oh, you could sing? So I told Pachi, who is he? And he introduced himself. His name was David Freitas. And everybody called him Uncle Junior. So I found that out later on. And so I called David Uncle Junior, my St. Paul Elvis. Because he would always do this with his hair, fix his hair, and he would sing. And I told my grandmother, I said, I met this guy. He asked me for a dance. He told me his name is David Freitas. And to me, he's Elvis. My grandmother said, why you say Elvis? Because he can sing. And he can change his tone and that's the name I gave him, Elvis. He's the Elvis Presley to me, singer.
Was this at the wedding?
No, this was at the dance.
Oh,
Just the dance itself, the first dance we went to.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so, I got, someone else came up to me to ask me for a dance. And it was Victor Lakanov. And like I said, I think I've kind of jumped way ahead on what I'm talking about. I kind of missed parts, like how did I meet them? But anyway, he says, oh, would you like to dance? I said, no, I'm waiting for someone. Someone I was waiting for is Myron, my husband now.
So wait. Is this your first dance, like in that summer before Becky got married?
Yes.
So when did you meet Myron?
So I met Myron that summer.
Yeah.
I met Myron that summer.
Like early on in the summer?
I met Myron that summer when Pachi started working, was hired to work at the byproducts.
Okay.
Right. And when Pachi went to work, I'm sorry, like I said, I've jumped way ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so Julie's the one that was able to take me for my walks. And she would say, okay, we're going to go and see Pachi at the byproducts plant. And so we walked from her grandmother's house to where, across where the small boat harbor is. That did not exist, but that's where we had walked. And I said, I don't know if I have the right shoes on. But we walked from there, from town, across that part of that part from where the government buildings were to get to the byproducts plant. So I called it the backside, I guess. And
was it still a beach?
So
then?
yes,
Yeah.
so it was a beach, and there was staff quarters before you got to byproducts plant. Right, yeah. And so we walked that way, and when I got to byproducts plant, waited for Pachi, And then Pachi, tells me about work and stuff. And then how I met Myron. Pachi came home and said, there's someone that wants to meet you, but this person knows who you are, my name, in other words. And it's like, oh, okay. And I said, who is it? And she says, well, I think I'll just have this person tell you who they are, who it is. So I said, okay. And I said, well, Pachi, you know what? If he's married, then I'm not going to meet him. If he has a girlfriend, so I'm not going to meet him. I said, sorry. And she laughed and she said, he's not married and he doesn't have a girlfriend as far as she knew. So I said, okay. And I said, just let me know when he's going to come to meet me. So I said, okay. So this is before the dance. And so she says, oh, I have a note for you. And I said, a note? She says, yeah, the note is from this person. So I opened the note. And I said, oh, how come? She hands me the note and I'm going to open the note. And so as I'm opening the note, I say to her, well, why didn't this person just come and give me this note? Or just come and meet me here? And she says, he's busy. She said, he. So I said, oh, it's a he. And so she says, yeah. So I open the note and says, I'll pick you up for the dance. And so it's like, okay, Pachi, who is this person? Because it seems like you just came home from work and this note is with you. So it must be somebody you're working with. And she says, yeah, he's my boss at work. And I said, oh, okay. And what's his name? And so she says, his name is Myron. And I was like, oh, Myron, okay. So I haven't met him, so I don't know how he looks, Can't identify him. Even if I had probably walked by him, I wouldn't know if it was him. And so got the note. There was a dance coming up. And so he said he would come and pick me up. So picked me up. I told Pachi, I said, okay. I guess I don't need to give you this note back. Just tell him, sure, I'd like to meet him. And so came, picked me up. And I told Pachi, I said, did he say what time he was going to come? And she says, no, but he said he'll be here. So I said, okay. And so waited and waited. And then finally, before that dance, before that note, the day I went to go see Pachi at work, Julie was with me, I actually did meet him. I did meet him, but I didn't know it was him. So when I had gotten there, he was in the front. I still remember what he was wearing. He was wearing a red hat, a brown sweater. There were stripes on it, jeans, and you guys call it the extra tough boots. And when I got there, I didn't want to walk into the building without getting permission. And so this person comes out, and he's, I just said, hi. And he says, hi. And he says, you're Marie, right? And it's like, yes, my name is Marie. I said, I came to see my girlfriend Pachi. She works here. And he says, you could see her. And then he didn't tell me his name. I said, okay, thank you. I walk in, met Pachi. So that's how I met him. But I didn't ask him for his name, and he didn't tell me his name. And so I went in, Pachi showed me around, and then I left with Julie. So when that note came, that day Pachi brought that note home and gave it to me. And when he came, to me, it's like, I met this guy already. I met him. So this is, to myself, oh, so this is Myron. And so we went for a ride, and he was very nice. He said, "Welcome to St. Paul. My name is Myron." I said, "Yeah, we've met, but I just didn't know it was him." And we went for a ride, and he asked me if I had seen the island, and I said, "Well, I've only stayed in town with Pachi. We have not gone anywhere else besides the airport, when I arrived." And so it's okay. So would you like to go for a ride? Sure. And so went for a ride. But I did say to him, and I did ask him, and I said, "You're not married and you don't have a girlfriend?" He said, "No." So I said, "Okay." Because if he did, then I was just going to say, "Sorry."
Mm-hmm.
So we went for a ride. Like I said, he started telling me where East Landing is. And it was a nice ride. It was pretty much in town, and then out to the airport area, and then back. And then he said, "Do you have any plans for the dance that's coming up?" And I said, "Well, Pachi and I were going to go to the dance." And he says, "Okay, I'll pick you up, but if I don't get there and you and Pachi are ready to head to the dance, I can meet you there." I said, "Sure." So this is the part where I go to the dance, and I met Uncle Junior. But then somebody else also asked me for a dance, and this was Victor Lacana. And he says, "Oh, would you like to dance?" And it's like, "No, it's okay. I'm waiting for someone." And he says, "Oh, who are you waiting for?" And I said, "Myron." And he says, "Oh." And so he kind of threw a joke in there. "I'm handsomer than him." Yeah. So I said, "Thank you for asking me for a dance, but I'll wait for him." And so Myron got there late. And I actually, we're way ahead. I actually, before meeting Myron, I got to meet Z. I didn't know it was his sister, his father, that everybody calls him Old Man, Alexander. And I got to meet his mother. So I've met his mother, his father, and his sister, but I did not know that
They were all related.
Yeah, that they were his parents and his sister. And so when I got to the dance, Z, of course, was there. Z became my biggest St. Paul Alia friend. Not remember, mind you, I didn't know that they were brother and sisters. And so, and I think if anything, I know that Myron, I'm sure, told her that he was going to be meeting me at the dance, but she just didn't say anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I waited, and then he finally came, and he apologized for being late. He had a flat tire, so it's like, okay, it's cool. And I also met Dino. Dino and Myron were best friends, and I met Dino's girlfriend, Susie. And so as the days went by, being here in St. Paul, that's who I started to hang around with, because Pachi was always at work, and then I won't see her till after work. And so there's Myron, myself, Dino, and Susie. But Myron and I were not boyfriend and girlfriend. We were just really good friends. I told him, I said, "I'm not here to carry on being boyfriend, girlfriend. I'm just here to attend a wedding and go home. But I'm really happy to be here to know about your hometown and meet the people and see how it is to live here on an island that's smaller than my hometown." And so that's what we spoke about. Myron and I exchanged his way of living and my way of living, how I grew up, how he grew up, the things he did, school. I did not know that the school here did not have a complete high school, right? And so I said, "So where do you go to school?" where do the high school students attend school? And so he started explaining to me about the boarding homes. And I said, oh my gosh, that's isn't that hard to have a child leave home to attend high school elsewhere?
Because he had just come back. Probably did he go to Mount Edgecombe that before that?
He was
He was.
going to be
No.
attending Palmer.
Oh, the boarding homes.
Boarding
Yeah,
home, I'm
that's
sorry.
right. No,
Boarding
you were
home.
right.
Yeah, boarding school. He said the boarding home.
Yeah, in
And so he
Worcester.
started to explain that to me. And I asked him, I said, so what is the process? And he says, well, we fill out applications. And then he just said, they'll post a list up at the store. And I saw that listing. And it was interesting because it wasn't just Palmer. I saw Mount Edgecombe, and then I saw Wasilla. So there was 3 separate lists that showed the students that lived in St. Paul and which high schools they were going to be attending. Yeah. And so I had asked him, I said, okay, I'm sorry, so nobody gets to attend the schools in Anchorage? And he says, yes. If the parents want their child to attend the schools in Anchorage, then they can. But they'll have to apply, that kind of stuff. So I said, oh, okay. Wow, that's really different. I never got to attend a boarding school. We have schools at my hometown. We have elementary, junior high, high school. We have the university. So it was just nice to hear and find out that outside of my hometown, it's not always what I had thought. It's different, the culture. And I know where everybody is from. It's different from my hometown. But just for me to see this and, like, wow. And it just made me feel that a student that has to leave home, how do you go about communicating with your parents, your siblings, if you're okay?
Yeah.
Can you come home? How soon can you come home? And when do you come home, to see your family?
So Dino and Susie, I think, were probably in school, but
Dino and Susie,
ending school,
Yeah.
maybe that next year, or
I
no.
know Dino went to Palmer also. Oh wait, he went to yes. I remember Myron, Fabius, Walter. Fabius, Walter went to Palmer. I believe Dino went to Wasilla. Yeah, because he drove to Palmer. He was trying to go pick Myron up. But he drove to Wasilla. Susie, I'm not sure if Susie went to school at Mount Edgecombe then. Yeah. But anyway, it was the summer. And so I just asked, I said, so what do you all do during the summer? And so they told me about applying for jobs. And there's the seal harvest. There's the coffee shops. There's the store. And then byproducts plant. And then
waitressing
at the restaurant and at the hotel. And so I said, okay. And I found out that the students, when they apply for jobs so that they can earn some money so that they can be ready when they're ready to leave for school. So I said, oh, that's interesting. Yeah. And then I was telling him, I said, where I live, we have schools all over in my hometown. So on my island, we have villages, or you can call them, they're broken down by municipalities. So there's a name to each village. So like I grew up on the central part of my hometown, which is Barragata, Cañada Barragata. And there's the northern, the central, and the southern part of the island. I'm related to a lot of people at home. And so there's schools for every village. There's an elementary, a junior, there's a certain elementary school, junior high school, and high school that you attend. and it goes by the section or the village that where you live. And so so when he told me, and I heard about the boarding school, and I said, wow, so when you leave, who do you stay with? Do you stay at the school? He says some students live with foster parents. I believe that's what they had called them. And so they live with them, and, of course there's rules to follow and stuff. But like Mount Edgecombe, I guess they had dorms. And so I didn't know anything about that until Myron explained it to me. And so I said, wow. I said, so when did the students come home? He says, back then, if your parents cannot bring you home for Christmas, for example, then you stay where you're at and you don't come home until the end of the school year. And so to myself, I was like, wow, it's got to be tough. I said, wow, you guys that makes you strong. You become a strong person. You leave home, you're independent, and you're learning to live without your parents, and it's part of growing up, I know that. But it's just different for me. I never had to leave home to go to school elsewhere, to complete my education, high school at least. And so that's what I learned about high school. Myron invited me to attend his graduation. He was graduating in May of the following year. And so I told him, I said, let me think about it. The summer went by. I had a great summer. It was nice. Myron, Susie, and Dino, we went all over. We went all over in his dad's Datsun. Don't ask me how all four of us fit in there, but we did. And
you were all young and skinny then.
Right. And they really they took me on a tour. We drove everywhere to where we could go. And they told me like Southwest Point, Northeast, East Landing, Reef. And I'm trying to remember all these places that they've taken me. The camp house at Northeast. I had asked about that, and I said, there's only two camp houses. There's Northeast and Southwest. At that time, Myron's parents had the Southwest camp house. And so I thought it was cute.
Was that that one that Zappanee wasn't up
Yes,
at the time?
that one was there also.
Okay.
Because I had asked. I never saw anybody, but I did ask about that. So the one at Zappanee is, I believe, Cousin Mac's dad's camp house. And the one at Southwest used to be Pachi's grandma and grandpa's, but I guess they had handed it over or just given it to Alex and Susie Melovidov. And then the one at Northeast was just a camp house that everybody was able to use if they needed to go camping. And so Southwest Point was my favorite place. I just loved it because right at, you pull up and I could just see the ocean when it's sun shining. It was pretty, and it just reminded me of home.
Did you get homesick while you were here?
No.
Okay.
I did not get homesick. The other thing I wanted to say is the flowers were so pretty. I've never seen flowers grow in the middle of the road. Back then, the road was scoria, and so as we were driving, I said, "Oh my gosh, the flowers! They're right in the middle of the road. Nobody drives over them." Back then, it was just a one-way road. And I said, "So what do you do when there's another vehicle coming?" And so they told me about the turnouts. That's what they were there for. So I said, "Oh, okay." And I said, "Oh, it's so pretty, these flowers. I've never seen flowers grow in the middle of the road." Yeah, and so they were telling me about the yellow flowers that they called jars. They said if I picked those, it was going to rain. So even if I wanted to pick them, I didn't. It's like, I don't want it to rain. It's sun shining. And then I saw the, what other flowers. Forget me not. I saw the puchkis. Myron picked puchkis and showed me how you guys go about peeling it, and you guys called it the wild celery. They told me about the lakodas, and
Did you get to have some that summer?
yes,
You
I did.
Huh?
I even had luster.
Mm.
So I had.
So you liked it right away?
Yes,
you?
I
Yeah.
did.
Okay.
Yeah, I liked it right away. I took to it right away, actually, and it was like, oh my gosh, how do I eat this?
You're smacking your lips
How
now.
do I go? Well, I didn't know how to go about with it, and they showed me. They explained to me, and they showed me how to go about eating the luster, having seal meat, the lokoda. And so I had asked, what is the difference? They explained that to me. I watched how they, from the time that they got the seal and what they did
Mm.
to get it to where you're going to prepare it.
Mm-hmm.
I got to see that.
Did you? Who was it that you were? Who was your teacher? The person you were? Was it Susie? Was it Z? For learning to prepare or cut the seal, or was Myron doing
So
that?
Myron and Dino were the ones that went and got the seal for his parents. And then they just told me the process, but I did watch them. It was already all cut up and everything, but they took care of cleaning it, cutting it up, and then taking it and giving it to his mom, and then she would prepare it. So the way I had tried seal meat was boiled seal meat, boiled lakoda, and they had potatoes and
boiled. But boiled seal meat.
boiled seal meat.
That's still my favorite way to eat it. I don't know
Boiled
why.
seal meat,
Just-
boiled lakoda. I've tried that. The luster. Pretty much when I met my. Okay, so I don't know how to cook. I'll clean. I don't even like to go and plant. So a girl coming from the Mariana Islands is like, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I wanted to do other things. Meeting Myron, and later on we got into our relationship, and I told him, I said, I don't know how to cook. I just don't do that. Knowing that there was no bakeries here, no restaurants, no stores to where you can go and pick up a meal and take it home, I said, man, I guess I need to learn how to cook. So I did. And I watched Myron's mom, Susie, prepare some of her Aleut dishes. I've watched Z, but I kind of just taught myself, okay, I'll just watch and I'll learn. Z was my tester. When I tried to make bread dough, when I tried to make pie crust, just anything, I would take it to her and it's like, did I do it right, or how is it? And so that's how I learned. I learned to prepare the Aleut dishes, and I can do it. I'm proud of myself. And for me to learn how to do that, I gave myself a big pat on the shoulder because, like I said, I didn't know how to cook. But then I started to do other stuff, prepare meals.
I think maybe this is probably the pace you had to learn to cook too.
This is where I learned to cook and bake. I even decorated my children's birthday cakes because there was no bakeries here.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember when my mom said that to me. You're going to have to decorate the kids' birthday cakes.
So a lot of the things that I never used to do, that even made me even think more of, we can't take things for granted.
Yeah.
this is where my age of leaving home, coming to St. Paul, and that teenage life is to where it didn't happen at my hometown. It happened here in St. Paul. This is where I began that life, my life, from graduating from high school, having my first job, meeting Pachi, her inviting me to her hometown, and then meeting someone and returning back to St. Paul and began my life. This is where it happened. It's St. Paul. And I've made St. Paul my home. And I may get a little emotional. But I started to learn a lot more about myself, becoming an adult. As a young adult, a teenager into being that young adult. And then, having a relationship, getting married, having children, and not having anybody in my family here. And so I learned a lot on my own, but it made me a stronger person. I'm not saying that I'm weak, but it made me that person. It made me who I wanted to become. And the things that I've learned here in St. Paul, it's taught me a lot. Not just the island, the culture, the way of living, the traditions. There's so much that I can share with all of you. Like how I met Debbie, how I met you. I can tell you how I met certain people. Trifim, I think about him at times. I used to walk by and he would whistle. And he'd always have this smile. And he'd always say, the Hawaii lady. I'm not from Hawaii, but that's what he would call me. Uncle Terry.
Who's Trifim?
Trifim is...
Honey's brother.
Yeah, Honey's brother.
You know Honey? Yeah.
Okay, and then at the store, there's Uncle Terry, Toretti Freitas, and there's Mary Lou's husband, Alexei. They worked at the store and they would come out in aprons. So they were the ones that butchered the meat and everything. And Uncle Terry would whistle. So he would whistle, It's like, oh, I know who that is. I turn around and, hi, good afternoon. And they would talk with me, say hi. And they'll ask me how my day is, how I'm doing. And then who else? Oh, Vlas. Dorothy Shablin's husband. He was the village officer. Village officer. And I met Vlas. He's a funny guy. Z, I told you I met Z. And of course, I wanted to start learning Aleut words. And Z's not the right person. She taught me I asked her one simple question: how do you say hello? If I wanted to say hello to my friends or anybody here in St. Paul, how do I say hello? And my children told me, Mom, don't say that. You really don't want to say that. It's like, well, maybe if I say it, they'll edit it. And so Z did teach me.
If you say it in Unangan, nobody's going to know.
I don't know. Anyway, I did ask Z. I said, Z, how do you say hello in Unangan? I want to say hello to my friends, so how do I say hello? So she told me, you have to say chiso. And I said, okay. So I really believed her. I mean, I trusted her. I believed her. It's her language, right? And I didn't think of anything else. One day I went to the store by myself because Z was going to be there, and I told her I'd meet her there after 5 o'clock. And I walked in, and Vlas Shablin was in uniform. And when I walked in, I saw Z in the back, from where I was standing in the front door. And I waved my hand, and I said, hi, Chiso. And everybody looked at me. Vlas turned red. And he came up to me, and he said, with a big smile, and he says, do you know what you just said? And I said, yes, I was saying hello to my friend Z. She's back there. I was pointing. And he looked at me and he blushed. He was so red. And at that moment, I was like, what did I do? And he said to me, he said, go and ask Z what that means. And so when I walked to the back and I said, Z, I said hi to you in your language, in Aleut, and that officer up there, glass, he told me to ask you what it really means. What does it mean? And when she told me, I was so embarrassed. I was so embarrassed. I mean, there was a lot of people in the store. And I was so embarrassed, and I told Zay, I said, I don't trust you.
And
I
that
will
store was
never-
even set up differently than
I'll
like
never ask you again how to teach me another Aleut word unless you're really going to be honest with me about it. She said, I don't know you. She was telling me, I don't know you. She walked away. And yes, when you walk in the store, the ladies were over here, if I remember. The
Those
cash
cashiers,
registers were
yeah,
on the front.
it's all
So
set up
you
there.
walk into the store, and to my right, the registers were there. There was two. In front of me, there's a long table, and it had boxes filled with potatoes, onions, produce. They were on the front there. You can see the canned goods on the other side of the store. There were shelves, homemade shelves. And you walk to the back, and then they had a little bit of everything, the way it was set up. If you needed to get frozen meat, they did have a section, but it was in the back. So you walk in the store, there's the produce, there's the register, there's the shelves of canned goods. And then in the back, there's like a little, you know how you walk in the stores, like cars, and then you you want to get pork chops or whatever. So they had that little frozen section.
so the way that it's now with the walled off,
Yeah.
that was open, like right in that area.
Right.
Shelves this way. It's
And then to the back, they would have like they would have a little bit of clothing, maybe a couple of appliances. I'm not too sure. I didn't really look way back, but I know there was like a place where they had some clothing for women, children. Yeah. So that's how the store was. Oh, and then so up front, when I came to St. Paul Island, Pachi did not tell me that I should get myself a carton of cigarettes. I just figured they did sell cigarettes, so I went to the store and I smoked Virginia Slims back then. And I said, I'd like to buy a pack of Virginia Slims. And they all looked at me and they said, well, we don't have that, but we do have Pall Mall, the gold packs. And so I said, it's okay. It's okay. Thank you. So I didn't know that they didn't carry my brand of cigarettes. And so I ended up buying Marlboro Reds. I believe they were menthol. And it was either that or Cools. And I was like, we'll go with Marlboro Red. And so that was what I smoked while I was here. Yeah.
With the menthol.
But I wasn't, right.
I think it's.
But
when
I
I
wasn't-
smoked too, and I think I remember that.
But
we
I
were
wasn't,
menthol smokers.
But I wasn't a heavy smoker.
I forgot
It
I
was just
smoked Cools.
one of them things, I don't know, but yeah. So that was the other thing. The ladies that I remembered working at the store then was Laura.
Mm-hmm.
Laura and
Were they younger than her? I know Maxim worked there for a while. Booter and
there was just ladies
don't
when I
know if
went
he
to the
was-
store.
No, he was there when my son Michael was little. So
Okay.
before him, Laura. Was it
There's
Patricia?
Laura.
Merkuliev?
No,
Not yet.
it's Laura. I know Barbara Woodall
Oh
worked at
yes,
the
that's
store.
right. She
Yeah,
did. Yeah.
Barbara. But this is later because she came, I think, after I had returned to St.
Barbara
Paul.
Woodall. did,
Yeah, her and her husband Glenn.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the store.
Now I'm gonna have to ask Laura who worked there when she
Yeah.
did.
Yeah, I remember Laura. I mean, I didn't know who she was, but I mean, now I know who she is. And so I
Those
remember
cash
Laura.
registers were
Yeah, it was
huge.
right. Yeah, the old-fashioned cash registers. The store was nice and clean. I mean, it was nice. To me, it was like walking into a country store, you know. And at home, we have supermarkets, so that was different for me. We do have stores that are family-owned businesses at my hometown, and they're small, maybe like Auntie Alice's shop, just like that. But they would have everything in boxes, and they
Yeah.
would have cans displayed so that you can see what they're selling, what are in the boxes. It was cute. Auntie Alice had a ice cream shop and a burger shop, which used to be right by where the father Victor lives now.
Right here.
Yeah, used to be right there, and it's small. And we'd walk in, and she would sell burgers, and that's where a lot of the teenagers hung out. Yeah, so we stopped in there for a little bit. There was a Steve and Ann's Curio shop. Beautiful gift shop. I've bought a few things.
Yeah, that was fun.
I have my nativity poster that I put up every year, and that's where I bought that from. Yeah, and Myron says you still have that. I even remember when I first knew about the Easter bread. So when I went there, she had this round shaped dish. And I said, hey, Myron, this would be perfect. Your mom would make Easter bread, put it right in the center, put the eggs around it. And I still have that. Yeah.
Is this one that was in the basement or in the back of the house?
Uh,
Like, they were in the basement for a while, and then they built that extension.
It was in the basement, and then they
Okay.
had that extension, so that's how we would walk in through there. And she had a little bit of everything, yeah, from ashtrays. I mean, just a little bit of everything, yeah. What else? There weren't very many vehicles when I came here. There were no trees. Oh my gosh, there was no trees when I came here. I said, why did I not ask you about the trees? Pachi, you have no trees. And someone told me, we do have trees. They're the puchkis. That's our trees. And I didn't understand at that moment. You know, I was like, what are they? And so when I saw them, I said, oh, okay, that's why. I know now why they call it their trees. So that was the puchkis. I found out that men go hunting. They go hunting for birds, ducks. They go fishing for halibut. They go egg picking. Remember egg picking? Oh, I had an experience on that one. I went egg picking. My father-in-law, Alex, we weren't married yet, but he's my father-in-law. Myron and them were going to go egg picking one day. And I asked Z if she was going to go. She said yes. So I said, okay, I want to come. And so Myron says, yeah, okay, you sure? Yeah. So they didn't tell me what they were going to do. And so we went out to Antone Lake. And so there used to be a road there. So you would drive up to where that hill is. I said, you guys don't have mountains here, just hills, right? So you drive up to their park, and then we had to walk up to the top. And I didn't know why they had ropes with them and a basket or something to put the eggs in. I just thought, oh, are they going to go to the top of that hill and just get the eggs? And so Z says, we got to the top, and Z says, okay, you and I are going to be the anchor ladies. I said, what do you mean anchor ladies? Well, they're going to tie this rope around us, and we're going to sit right here. We're not going to move. And the guys are going to let somebody down on the other end. And I said, what do you mean on the other end? And I said, you're kidding me, right? And she says, no. And I said, oh my Lord, are they going to be okay? Is that person going to be okay? And, you know, I was just like, at that time, it was like, I don't know if I want to do this. What if that person got hurt? And so I said, okay, I'll sit here with you. I promise we won't move. And they tied the ropes around us. So we were back here, and towards the end of that, to where the cliff is, the birds were down there. So you have to tie someone on that end of that rope and secure them enough to where you know they're not going to get hurt. And the guys that were up on top would let him down. And that person that they let down is the one that's going to go from one part of the cliff to the next and grabbing the eggs and putting them in whatever he had, a backpack or a basket. But it was pretty much a backpack that they had. And when they had put that person down, I closed my eyes because I was worried. I was like, oh my gosh, is he going to be okay? And they said yes. And so I said, all right. So that was my experience on egg picking. I said I'd never go do that again. I went.
Do you remember who all were the egg pickers?
I remember there was.
I was wondering if like someone like Maxima was there.
No, Maxima wasn't the one that went down. I remember Ivan going down. Logan wanted to at one time. But there was Logan, Myron, Ivan, Charlie. They were the ones that all came with us, but they were already there. Some followed, met out there. Z, myself.
Not Butchie Boy.
Butchie Boy. Maxima wasn't there. He did not come with us.
He's probably getting locked with
Yeah. Lester was there.
Okay.
So anyway, so one person went down. 2 people sat. Well, to me, for me, there's the 2 of us that sat in the back. One went down, and then there's like at least 6 other guys making sure that the person they let down would be fine, would be okay, and then they would bring that person back up. Yeah, and so that's how they did their egg picking.
And the anchors, so they know they can't.
The anchors, so that
It's like they were the knots.
we were the ones.
Like they can't go.
We were the
so far.
ones that are going to make sure that that rope was not going to come off us and have that person on the other end get hurt. And so I never went and did that again. I went Kagiyadan hunting, or kittiwags also. There are kittiwags. There's the red lakes and the black lakes. I believe it's called Sakitan, and there's another name, I know it. Anyway, I wanted to go bird hunting, so I said okay. And so the guys have firearms, and I'm scared of firearms. My dad has firearms, and he used to always keep them locked in a locker, and he would always tell us, you do not touch that locker, you do not open it, only Daddy does. Yeah, but he kept it locked, so he told us that firearms were dangerous, and so that's why I was afraid of firearms. And the men go hunting, so I went with Myron and his brother and his nephews. We went bird hunting, and I believe also with Douglas's boys. I think Dougie was there, and I want to say either Sonny Boy or Stevie, one of them. And so they want to go bird hunting. So I said, okay, I'll come. I didn't want to stay home, so I went with them. And they told me to have fun, so I went, and they shot the birds. And they told me, so, what do I know, right? I never went bird hunting. They told me I had to hold the bird and wiggle it in the air and make this bird sound. Now, I don't really know how to do it. So I said, how about if I just stand here and I'll just wiggle the bird in the air? And they said that would attract the birds, And so I said, okay, I could do that. And so I stood there and I was doing this, holding that bird, and there would be birds flying, and the guys would be shooting them down, and they would maybe catch like a good maybe 15 to 20, and then they would take it into town and they would check on the elders And if any of them wanted, they would give it to them. They would just ask them how many they would like, and they would take them, and I guess they take it and they pluck it, prepare it for a meal. And so that was my bird hunting experience. I didn't know what puffins were. When I saw them for the first time, I said, oh my gosh, they're beautiful ducks. I said, you guys hunt these? And they were so pretty. You know, and first time I held a puffin in my hand, and Myron says, yeah. I says, okay. And so these were the things that I got introduced to. Yeah. So I went seal harvesting. The only thing I didn't do was the halibut fishing. Yeah. I don't know why. Maybe because I didn't go down when anybody went fishing, but I did ask about fishing because I saw a lot of boats, and I asked Myron. I said, so I don't see large boats, big boats, and he said that they went fishing in what they call skiffs. So I said, oh my gosh, they go out on those little I called it the little boat. They go out on those little boats, and he says, yeah, we call them skiffs. And I said, how many people go on the skiff? How many people can you take out to go fishing? And he says, oh, at least 3. Usually there's always 2 people, but they can take 3. So there was 3. So they will go halibut fishing, they bring it home. And then when they bring it home, again, they ask family, friends if they want any halibut, and they give it to them. I watched how they, from the time that they take it home, when Myron or his brother Antony would take it home, how my mother-in-law, Susie, she would put it on her counter, how to clean it. It was, it was already gutted, but she would clean it and then fillet it or chunk it. So I watched how she did that, and I thought to myself, oh, that's interesting. So I never did fish cleaning at home either. So that was something I learned. And there was a black side and a white side to the fish. And I asked how come it was that way. And so Myron said, it's black on one side and white on the other side because they swim like this. So the darker side is upwards and the white side is the bottom. And they're down on the bottom. They live on the bottom of the ocean. And so that's how they swim. And when they're caught, I said, how do they catch them? I saw like 4-footers, 5-footers. And I said, how do they bring it in? And so he told me that his dad and his brother, or whoever goes fishing, they have their line, and they have a gaff. And that's how they would pull the halibut in. And when they come ashore, that's when they do all the gutting and then the cleaning and all that. So that's what I learned about halibut fishing.